Hello and welcome to the channel of Hashaliach once again. Today is the 19th of September 2024. So I want to bring out just a couple of points from a story in 1 Samuel 23. And I'm trusting that the Spirit of God will speak to you and it'll help you understand maybe a couple of things that are going on in your own life which might have happened recently or long in the past. But anyway, let me start in 1 Samuel 23, verse 1. Now, this is in the middle of a situation where David is constantly on the run from Saul. Saul is regularly trying to kill David, not having a lot of success, but David is on the run. And just recently, he's been in the cave of Adullam, but he's on the move again. And so, here in 1 Samuel 23, verse 1, the complete Jewish study Bible, David was told the Philistines are fighting Keilah. Now, okay, Keilah is a little city. It's approximately 3 miles south of the caves of Adullam. But anyway, this is the place that the Philistines are fighting Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. David consulted Adonai, asking, should I go and attack these Philistines? So David is very specific in asking Adonai what he should do with regards to these Philistines attacking an Israelite city. And notice the heart of David here. I mean, he's on the run from Saul, but he's still concerned about what happens to the Israelites. Adonai answered David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. David's men said to him, look, we're already afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah to fight the armies of the Philistines? David's men are afraid. They're on the run. This is his band of merry men that he met at the cave of Adullam. And they're not yet quite David's mighty men. But he says they're scared. But anyway, they do go up to fight the Philistines. Verse 4. David consulted Adonai again, and Adonai answered him, set out and go down to Keilah, because I will hand the Philistines over to you. David and his men went to Keilah and fought the Philistines. They defeated them in a great slaughter and led away their livestock. Thus David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So, David consulted God a second time. God confirmed to him that he was going to have success against the Philistines. They would be handed over to him. And indeed, it was such a victory that it says they defeated them in a great slaughter and led away their livestock. Thus, David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So you'd imagine that the inhabitants of this city, Keilah, are incredibly grateful to David and his men, because it certainly would have looked like without David's intervention that the inhabitants of Keilah would have been taken out in a great slaughter rather than the Philistines. So these people in Keilah have got a lot to thank David for. Ultimately, God, but David did the dirty work. So pick it up in verse 6. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David in Keilah, he had brought a ritual vest with him. Now Saul, on being informed that David had gone to Keilah, had said, God has put him into my hands. He's trapped himself by entering a town with gates and bars. So Keilah was a well protected city. It's got gates and bars. Obviously, it wasn't going to be enough to keep out the Philistines. And as we see here, it's not going to be enough to keep out Saul. So Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting something against him, so he told Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ritual vest here." Then David said, "Adonai, God of Israel, your servant has certainly heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the city just to get me. He's going to destroy the whole city just to get me. Will the men of Keilah turn me over to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? Adonai, God of Israel, please tell your servant." So David asks God two specific questions. Will the men of Keilah turn me over to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? Then he says, Adonai, God of Israel, please tell your servant. So he specifically ends the questions with, says, please answer me. Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? Adonai, God of Israel, please tell your servant. Adonai said, he will come down. Saul will come down. But he didn't answer the first question. Will the inhabitants of the city hand me over to Saul? So verse 12. Then David asked, so he asked a second time. Then David asked, will the men of Keilah hand me and my men over to Saul? Adonai said, they will hand you over. So David and his men, now around 600, got up and left Keilah and went wherever they could. It was told Shaul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he called off the expedition. David was insistent he'd asked two questions. One was answered. So he asked the second question again. Will we be handed over? And God says to him, yes, these men of Keilah will hand you over to Saul. These men that you have just saved from a great slaughter by the Philistines will hand you over to be slaughtered. David had a heart for God and he had a heart for Israel. That's why he went up and fought the Philistines. But he was a smart man. Something was bubbling up inside of him and he kind of suspected that this might happen. Now, in the natural, if you think about it, the people of Keilah have been saved from a great slaughter themselves. And now you've got Saul, the Israelites, their own people coming up against them. And Saul would have thought nothing, he'd taken out this whole city if it meant getting David. Such was Saul's insanity as he constantly hunted down David. But the point I want you to get here is that David and his men saved the men of Keilah. And you would have thought they're going to be very, very grateful. But ultimately, they weren't grateful enough because they were going to hand David over. You see, God often tells us to do things, say things or do things, or both, that people might not fully understand or appreciate. Might not fully understand or appreciate. David and his men did what they did because they had a heart for their own people, the Israelites, and so they saved the men of Keilah. But the men of Keilah didn't really fully understand or maybe more appreciate what David had done. It's pretty obvious because they were going to hand David over. So regardless of the fact that David had saved their skins, they were still prepared to hand David over so that they could have their skins saved a second time. So that's one of the things that I really want to emphasize. I know this has happened to me a few times in my life where I've had to say things, do things. And in one particular case, what God got me to do, set people, many people free who had been in bondage for 20 years. But they didn't really understand what I was doing when I first started to do it. In fact, I was considered to be a troublemaker. And even when it came to pass what I had to go and say and do, they didn't really appreciate it. They were fearful of me. Many didn't even want me around. But you see, friends, be obedient to God. Be obedient to God. Let me read to you. I've only got 2 scriptures left, portions of scripture, but I want to get a couple of points really entrenched into your mind before I wrap this up. So I'm going to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3. So just bear with me, my good friends. Colossians 3, and I'm going to read verses 23 and 24. Whatever work you do, put yourself into it as those who are serving not merely other people, but the Lord. Remember that as your reward you will receive the inheritance from the Lord. You are slaving for the Lord, for the Messiah. Ultimately, do what you're doing with all your heart, your body, mind, soul. Do it with everything you've got for God. Other people come second, but ultimately you're doing it for the Lord. He is the one that approves you. Whatever he gets you to say, whatever he gets you to do, don't be swayed by other people. Just do what he has commanded you to do and do it wholeheartedly. And finally, I'm going to turn to John chapter 2. And I'm going to read a couple of verses to you from there. Well, 3 verses actually. John chapter 2 before we wrap up. Verses 23 to 25. Now, while Yeshua was in Jerusalem at the Pesach festival, there were many people who believed in his name when they saw the miracles he performed. But he did not commit himself to them, for he knew what people are like. That is, he didn't need anyone to inform him about a person because he knew what was in the person's heart. A few months ago, maybe even as much as a year ago, the Lord gave me those verses. And I know why he gave me those verses, because he knew that people were going to try and persuade me one way or another. They were going to try and dissuade me from what he's called me to do. Commit yourself wholeheartedly to God. Forget about other people. People are fickle. You might be a preacher and you might preach 100 messages and everybody loves them. They just can't get enough of you. And then you preach message 101. And oh, people don't like it. They like this guy. I always knew there was something about him. Something wrong. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He's a heretic. We need to distance ourselves from this person. Completely forgetting the wonderful 100 messages that you'd preached previously. You've now preached one message that they don't like. Oh, let's get away from this guy. He's a heretic. People are fickle. It's God you're out to please. It's God I am out to please. And for this, we need that 100% commitment to the Lord. We also need maturity. Yes, we need to be united but God comes first. Look at that situation. David's on the run. He's been hounded down. And yet his heart is still for the people of God. And he consults God a number of times with very specific questions. He says, God, do you want us to go out and fight the Philistines? Yes, go up. And then his people are scared. So he consults God a second time. And God says, don't sweat it. Go, I'll hand them across to you. And there was a great slaughter. Such was the victory that God had given David and his men. They slaughtered the Philistines with a great slaughter. Were Keilah delighted? Well, no doubt they were delighted that their skins had been saved. But then, as soon as they heard that Saul was coming, oh, how fickle they were. Oh, we better hand David and his men across to Saul, and then we'll be saved a second time. Not everybody's going to understand what you're doing, friends. And not everybody is going to appreciate what you're doing. But he understands what you're doing because he's called you to it. And he appreciates what you're doing because you're doing it in obedience. So, friends, I hope this has helped you in some little way. And may the Lord bless the rest of your day. Until next time, God bless you.